So what is Power BI and what are the concepts behind this great tool? You might be using Power Apps or Power Automate and are wondering where does Power BI fit into that ecosystem. In this video, we cover the main concepts behind Power BI and I'm joined by Greg Nash, who is a fellow MVP and specialist in Power BI. Greg has been in the industry for more than 20 years, specializing in Power BI and the Azure Data Platform. Greg is also an MVP since 2020. Power BI is part of the Power Platform, which is the Microsoft no-code, low-code platform for building custom applications and extending some of the Dynamics 365 apps with additional capabilities. So the Power Platform is made up of some key components. So you have Dataverse, where you can securely store and manage data that is used by business applications. Data within Dataverse is stored within a set of tables. Then we have Power Apps, which lets you create custom business applications without writing code. It provides an easy-to-use interface to create and modify fields, form lists, and many more. You also have Power Pages that let you create, host, and administer external-facing business websites. You have Power Automate that lets you create automated processes and workflows. We have Power Virtual Agents, which is the chatbot creation tool that enables organizations to build conversational chatbots without writing, code using a visual interface. And then finally, we have Power BI, which is the business intelligence and data visualization tool that provides real-time insight into an organization's data. So let's explore Power BI in more details. So the first thing I started researching a bit, about the concept of Power BI and what are the features, and I knew some elements. I've created some basic report and so on, but I was struggling a bit at the beginning to understand what is the major difference between Power BI Service and Power BI Desktop. So would you mind giving us, for people who don't understand, the differences or who are new or kind of don't know Power BI that well, in basic term, what is the big difference between those two?
Yeah, sure. So Power BI essentially comes in sort of two flavors, if you like, and they're designed for two different experiences. So you've got the PowerBI.com or Power BI Service is what we call the web portal version of Power BI. If you go to www.powerbi.com, you'll end up in what we call the Power BI Service, and you log in. Similarly, if you logged into Office 365 and you went to Excel, you clicked on the Excel button there, it might take you to an Excel web experience. There's a Power BI web experience where all of your Power BI reports are navigated. You can slice and dice your data. You can look at all your different sets of reports. Essentially, that's a consumption experience for the most part. Power BI Desktop is a desktop tool that you download and install. Similarly, if you think about it in Excel terms, you install the Excel tool on your desktop, and it's a richer authoring experience. So the key difference between Power BI Service and Power BI Desktop is that you get a lot more authoring options in the Power BI desktop world. You can not only connect to data, but you also have access to model data and do data transformations that aren't necessarily available in the Power BI Service world. So if you think of Power BI Service as a place where all your users go to look at your reports, that's where people collaborate on reporting. They share reports between each other and do maybe do comments or interact with each other on reports. And the Power BI Desktop being the authoring tool, the tool for your analysts, your data experts, your subject matter experts to take that data and mash it up and create new reports and then publish those up to the Service Cloud. So those two experiences are sort of coming together, if you like. There's a push from Microsoft to move a lot of the functionality that is in Power BI Desktop today into the cloud, and we're seeing more and more that some of the function that you could only do in desktop before is now being moved into the cloud as time goes on. So you might one day see these two things come together, but for now there's still Power BI Desktop as your primary authoring experience and Power BI Service as your primary consumption experience, if you like.
Yeah, right. Okay, cool. Amazing explanation. Now I kind of understand a bit more the two, and it's good to understand and know that Microsoft is working on moving some items from the desktop to the service. Cool. So now if you were to look at, a typical Power BI project, if I wanted to start a project, create multiple reports and kind of start sharing those reports, where would you typically start from kind of a phase perspective through your project? Where do you start?
So when it comes to data and building these kind of interactive kind of reporting experiences that Power BI is kind of known for, we always have to start with the data, right? So we want to get to that data. We need to get to the data where it is, and data resides in all these different places. It could be in the cloud, it could be on premises, it could be in an Excel file on your desktop, it could be in your Dynamics 365 or your Dataverse service in Power Platform. It could be in a Microsoft SQL database, or it could be in an Amazon Redshift database. It could be in a completely different place. So you've got data that resides in all these different places. And so one of the key features of Power BI is this ability to connect to different data sources where it lies in a way that's easy for a regular user like you or I to be able to connect to this data and then be able to bring that data into our data modeling experience, to be able to manipulate that data and do something with it. So really the first place we start is where connecting to data. In the Power BI service, we have a number of different ways that we can connect to data, and a lot of different areas. There's actually over 200 data connectors available to you, sort of out of the box with Power BI. Whether that's a cloud service, some of the native Microsoft Azure services, or other online services like Google Analytics, for example, there are native data connectors that can connect to this data and bring that data in from that web API or from that SQL database easily. Now, one of the other key kind of areas that you might like to connect to data is, say, your files on your desktop. A lot of people they might have an Excel file, or they might have a CSV file. And so Power BI also has this ability to be able to read Excel natively. So obviously it's a Microsoft product, so it can read Excel pretty well, which is a great feature. And so it can read the pages on your Excel sheets, or it can pull CSV files in, or tab delimited files, or some other delimited file from your desktop as well. So this kind of ability to connect to different data sets in different places is really one of the core pieces of functionality, and we call this Power Query. And you see that the first kind of place you go when you start your Power BI journey is you go to get some data. There's a get data button, and when you get that data, you're opening Power Query to go and get those source data from the places where it resides.
Yeah. And am I correct saying that you have more options using the Power BI desktop to connect to more data sources than the Power BI service? Is that correct?
Yeah, so if you were to be building, and this is where probably that core difference comes in, is that you've got in the Power BI desktop world, you've got the ability to pretty much connect to any data set that is available to Power BI, whether it's an on-premises or cloud-based data set. But everything is available to you in the Power Query service. In the Power BI service in the cloud, you can only connect to cloud-based services. So you get a more limited set of data that you can connect to, and then the way that on-premises services works, like on-premises data works, if you've got data that's sitting on your desktop, for example, and you want to connect it up, it connects through what we call a gateway. Now, the Power BI service, you would need to, you don't necessarily have access to any of those gateway services unless you set the gateway up, and you probably would be doing something potentially in desktop to do that. So there is a limited set in service compared to Power BI desktop.
Yeah. Cool, amazing. So you have your data, right? So you connected your data maybe from various data sources. What's next? Do you build the report straight away from there, or you have to do anything else?
No, unfortunately, it's never that easy. Data is difficult, and it never comes in the format that we want it to be to make it easy to report on, right? And we see this so much in transactional systems, especially when you're dealing with SQL databases and maybe even systems like Dynamics 365. The data is stored in those systems that in a way that is optimized for transactions. So it's stored in a way that's efficient so that the service can process that really fast and write efficiently. Now, the way that data is stored for optimized for transactions is not necessarily optimized for analysis. So you might have tables that have a whole bunch of unreadable keys or things that don't really make sense inside the table. A lot of unnecessary columns that are only used during sort of transactional processing, maybe some flags and things like that. That your analytical side of things, when you're creating a new report or you're looking at things, they don't read easily. They're not easy to understand, and you want to make it as readable and optimized as possible when you're building your kind of analysis or you're building your report. So to take it from this transactional world and bring it into this analytical world, we have to do what's called data transformation. So we're transforming this data from this sort of transactional kind of view into a view that's easier to read and analyze. And we can do that through a number of different types of transformations. There's over 800 transformations you can do in Power Query, so there's a huge number of possible things you can do. Some of the most common ones are things like adding a new column so that maybe you're creating an aggregation column or categorizing something to make it easier to understand. You might need to pivot or unpivot data, which means that you're sort of transforming the column from what's a matrix style that you might have in Excel. A pivot table in Excel is what's called a matrix, where you've got columns running both vertically and horizontally, and you need to transform that into something that's a little bit easier to read or is better suited to analysis. So we pivot that data to make that happen. We might need to merge data sets together. So you've got your customers, and then you might have your customer locations. Now they might be living in two different tables in your transactional system, and maybe you just want to have one customer table. Every customer has a location. You want to bring those two things together. So we do what's called a merge or an append, where we stack tables on top of each other. And so in SQL we call these joins and unions. And a lot of people are familiar with those older SQL terms. But those types of data transformations are sort of necessary to shape the data into something that is going to work for analysis. And the core sort of tenet that Power BI is built on, the structure that Power BI is optimized for, is called a star schema model. And so what we're doing in the data transformation space is we're taking this transactional data, which could have any shape, frankly, and we're moving it into facts and dimension tables, which are the core sort of objects that a star schema uses to kind of move on from there. So when you're dealing with larger, more complex reporting, or you're building larger data sets, you're looking to move from this transactional space into this star schema space using data transformation techniques.
Yeah, right. Okay, interesting. And so where does data modeling comes into place? Before or after you transform your data, or together?
Yeah, so modeling is the next kind of step. So if you think of you've got your source data, you're moving this, you're creating these new tables, a dimension table. So there's, you've got a customer table, one row for every customer. That's what we call the granularity of that table. You may have a sales transactions table. It's got one row for every sale you make, and one customer can have many sales, and each sale only has one customer. So you have this relationship between these two tables that you've built. And you need to then define the relationship between those two tables. And that's where data modeling comes in. So the first step in data modeling is to take your transformed tables that have been optimized for analysis and define the relationships between those two tables. So you've got your facts and dimensions. So you join your dimension tables to your fact tables. You're creating what we call the star schema. And so this is where we actually model this data into a star schema. We during the modeling phase, we're also creating calculated columns, so we might need to add additional calculations during the modeling phase. And we also create what are called measures, which are aggregations that we build into the Power BI model. Calculations common calculations that in the measure world is something like, I want to know my total sales year to date, right? So it's like not just the total sales, which might be the aggregation of a column, but how many happened over the year. And you can't necessarily calculate that within the table, so it has to be outside the table. It's a calculation that runs over the model and can be used inside your visualizations to show us, what our total sales year to date are. And so we create these calculations, both column-wise calculations, which might be, take column A and column B and add them together to give us column C, and then this measure-wide calculations, which are actually aggregations over whole tables, which are then used in further down when we're creating our visualizations to show various things. So all of this process of defining the relationships, organizing our tables, and then creating these measures and calculated columns is all part of what we call data modeling in the Power BI world.
Amazing. Cool. So we have the data, we transformed the data, and we modeled it. What's next?
So now we have what is called a data set. And so fully modeled data, it might have our customers and our cities and locations and our sales transactions, which is kind of the classic kind of data model. That is that whole model itself is called a data set in the Power BI world. And a data set can be created in Power BI in desktop, as we kind of explained there. But you could also import an existing data set if you had one in Excel, for example, that was in a tool called Power Pivot, which is one of the features of Excel. If that's already existing, you can import that data set in and use it in the Power BI service as well.
Yeah.
So there's a few different ways to bring these data sets in. When we have a data set, what we do is we hit the publish button in our Power BI desktop. We're ready to go. That publishes then up to the cloud what we call the data set. So typically before we do any publish, we would create a visualization on top of that data set. But essentially, once the modeling is completed, we've completed the first stage of creating a Power BI report, which is to model the data correctly. And so there's a common kind of approach is to only build the data set first. Don't build any visualizations or anything, any of the report page. Publish the data set up to the Power BI service, and then what you can actually do is refer to that data set again back down. So you can open a new Power BI desktop, connect to the Power BI service, and say, I'd like to connect to this data set I just created, and now I want to create my visualization layer. Essentially, you're creating this you're breaking up the data set and the visualization so that potentially two people can work on it at the same time, or you're just creating that differentiation between the two. It's not necessary to do, but it is a common best practice type thing that you find a lot of Power BI people do to break those two things together.
Yeah, right. Okay. Cool. And then, okay, perfect. So we have our data sets published, and then after that?
So then, as I said, we're getting into now we're building our data visualization. And there's really two different ways you can think about what you're doing in data when it comes to visualization. There's this concept of data exploration, and then there's a concept of sort of data visualization. Data exploration is often done during the modeling phase. If you're not sure about what the data might look like, you want to spend a little bit of time with it, you're dragging and dropping things onto the Canvas page to maybe creating some visualizations, making sure that the trends look correct, that numbers look correct, maybe there's some seasonality that you would expect to see in your sales. We never sell anything in the middle of the year, so we expect a dip, and then it goes up. At Christmas time, we sell a whole lot of stuff, and we would expect to see that reflected in the data. So that data exploration is sense checking and ensuring that things going on. And Power BI is a very powerful data exploration tool, as you can imagine, because you've got all of this capability in a single tool. And so you find sometimes people in Power BI desktop are creating a whole bunch of random things to just explore the data.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
The other side of the fence is where we want to build a report to be published and shared for our end users to then explore the data themselves.
Yeah.
And so the key sort of feature of Power BI being an data exploration tool is that people can then slice and dice the data themselves when they're using this thing that has been created by the Power BI desktop author. So that's where we're creating a Power BI report. So we might add a number of pages. Those pages, typically we would have a page for each sort of business question that you might want to answer.
Right.
And so a business question might be something like, well, how were our sales last year? And then you may have a series of visualizations that help answer that question, maybe cutting it by different dimensions. So you say, well, our sales in New South Wales grew by 36%, but we notice in this customer demographic of, people aged 33 to 40, they dropped by 12%, but this growth was actually attributed to a growth in older people buying our things. So you're doing this like asking a business question and then answering that business question using a series of charts and visualizations and other things that people can use to then explore that kind of data set and understand it. So to do that, you have this concept of sort of filtering data. So the data set has all of the relationships between these tables, between customers and sales, and locations and sales, and people and like employees and sales. And so they're filtering that data as they go, slicing and dicing. They may be selecting customers or cities or people, and then that data will filter the sales data to show that relevant piece of information associated with that business question you're trying to answer. And then you may have, if it's a sales report, you may have 4 or 5 business questions that sales report answers as you go through So you're starting with these kind of business questions, and then you're creating different visualizations to help answer that business question, whether that's a pie chart, a column chart, an area chart, or something like that. So sort of standard kind of visuals. Maps are very popular. You have different map types, such as Azure mapping tools. You can use third-party mapping tools as well. There's all sorts of mapping capability. Then things like, if you want to just put a big number on the page, or you're having a KPI that you're tracking, you've got different visualizations associated with that. And then you can potentially, your visualization type might be a little bit more advanced, where you need to, say, show a table of data over multiple pages. A lot of Excel users like to see, like tabular style reporting, and they need it to print nicely on a PDF, or they need it to run into. And so for that type of solution, you might be creating what's called a paginated or operational report. And those paginated reports are a whole other report type that you can create in Power BI that then allows you to do that kind of PDF reporting. And then you've got even more advanced visual types. You have custom visuals, other visuals that you can get from the store, and then AI visuals like Q&A, which allows you to ask sort of natural language questions of your data, and then other AI visuals like the decomposition tree, key influences, and the smart narrative, which will do different sort of things based on your data model. It will either tell you, what influences another thing, what influences our sales to go down in January. You can get it to have visualization that shows something like that. Smart narrative will tell you a story. Hey, this went up by 33%. We noticed this trend happened, and that kind of thing. It tells you in kind of natural language. So there's these AI visuals that can add to that whole area. So there's a rich kind of visual pane that you can use, and it's always being updated. And obviously data visualization is a whole topic in and of itself, I guess, that you could spend a lot of time talking about.
Yeah. What about the Power Apps and the Cloud Flow? Have you played with that a bit? Is this used in Power BI a lot?
Yeah, it is. So another option, and one of the things, I think one of the key things about Power BI that people need to understand is that Power BI is really designed to be a consumption-only service. A lot of people think that Power BI is similar to Excel, where Excel, if there's a problem in your report, you can literally click on the cell, change the number, and then the report will be updated with a new number that has been entered into the data. Power BI is a read-only service. It will read data and it will present that data for you as it is in your source systems, whether that's an Excel or a CSV file or an SQL database or whatever. Now, where Power Apps and Cloudflow and Power Automate come into the spaces where we want to interact with the data side by side with the reporting. And so in the case of Power Apps, let's say we have a sales report, but we want to be able to adjust our forecast of sales and then have it reflect in our report to show that the forecast has been updated. And we want to present an experience to the user that's side by side. So we show the report and we show something where they can enter a new forecast into the pane. Well, you would use an embedded Power App to do that. So you can present on your Power BI page. You can present all of your data and a Power App, an embedded Power App that sits next to that data that you can then interact with and write back to the database or write back to Dataverse or whatever your source is for your Power Apps, and it will then update and then show that updated data back into the visualization. So you're getting this side-by-side experience. So Power Apps being the authoring tool for creating business applications and writing transactional data to a database, we're using that same native tool to then do this write back kind of scenario in the Power BI world. Right. Similarly, with Power Automate, you have a situation where you might need to trigger a workflow or run through an approval process before, say, that data is updated, or you wanted to, based on a report, trigger an alert or do something like that. You can use Power BI endpoints inside Power Automate to trigger workflows and then kick off other things to happen based on the data that's coming through from Power BI. So two very powerful kind of scenarios where Power Platform kind of works together to either write data back into the source data or to trigger workflow and automation pieces based on the results of your report, if you like.
Yeah. Cool. Perfect. Okay. Amazing. So you have created your report. You're happy with what you have built. I presume that if you wanted to make any changes to the data model or the data set, you can go back to Power BI, republish your data set. Is that the process? Yeah. Cool. And once you kind of happy with the first version, what's happening next?
Well, then we're faced with the situation where we want to potentially share this with our colleagues. And there's a few different kind of ways to share things inside the Power BI service, and this is now where we're really going up into the service. So we've done all of this stuff in Power BI Desktop. We're ready to share. So we hit the publish button on our report. The report gets published up. So you have this concept of workspaces in Power BI service, and these are really collaboration tools. So let's say you have multiple people all working on a series of reports. You want to collaborate on the creation of that thing. Then you're going to first build a workspace. That workspace is a collection of content that is related to each other that Power BI that you want to put into Power BI. So the workspace is kind of the first landing zone. The different types of content that you can create inside a workspace go beyond a report, right? So you could create a Power BI report, you could create what's called a Power BI dashboard, or you could create a few other artifacts like Power BI KPI, metrics or goals, and then there's also data flows and a few other bits and pieces. So this workspace can hold all of these things as a collection of artifacts that people can create that are all related to something. So a common workspace strategy is to have it department-wise. So maybe the HR department have their own workspace, and then inside the HR department they have they might have a series of reports that are associated with HR. You might have a dashboard, a master HR dashboard that is displayed up on a wallboard somewhere, and we'll talk a little bit about what a dashboard is in the Power BI world in a second. But and then you may have a series of connectors and things like that are all related to HR, all sitting inside that workspace. When you want to kind of share this out to the world, and we'll take that dashboard example. So, a really common request is to have, say, a TV screen up on the wall that shows the latest data, or a situation where maybe the CEO wants to see, the whole organization in a single pane of glass is kind of what we talk about. So Power BI has the ability to pin different visualizations from multiple locations into a single place called a dashboard.
Yeah.
And so that is where we can take, say, our HR reporting and our sales reporting, and we can pin visualizations associated with both of those things into a single place where the CEO or the executive can look and see what's happening at the same time.
Amazing. And now, so we see on the diagram also a feature about sharing reports. And for example, just to pick on PowerPoints, right? So we have share reports with PowerPoint, but we also have on the other side, we have export. And the export to PowerPoint, is there a difference between the two? Like, how do I understand that?
Yeah, so essentially, this is a fairly recent feature that they've introduced, is where the ability to embed Power BI within PowerPoint. So the old way of doing things would be to just share your report. Honestly, most of the time you would take a screenshot out of your Power BI and you'd paste it into PowerPoint, and do your board reporting or whatever you wanted to do. And there were third-party tools that could do a little bit of interaction between the two. But now we have native live data sharing into PowerPoint. So if you wanted to share your report in PowerPoint, you have the option of exporting it out to each page. The Power BI, if you look at the Power BI user interface, it has tabs. It's quite similarly kind of laid out to PowerPoint. And Microsoft in the past have called it PowerPoint for data. They have a lot of similar sort of functionality. And so you could export each page as a PowerPoint, But now what you can also do is then live connect inside your PowerPoint to your Power BI report. So you can click around and slice and do interactivity within your presentation. So you can have a live Power BI report that you may be presenting this month's sales data or whatever it is, and then it will automatically sort of update, and you can interact with it, making those presentations a little bit richer. So you can do sort of a little bit of both. You can either just share the report as a PowerPoint, or you can export it out and create this kind of more rich embedded experience, if you like. And then in terms of sharing options, you've got a huge range of different things you can kind of do when it comes to sharing. So you can share just a link to your report if you like. You have this option to share within Teams. So Teams has a Power BI app where people can collaborate within a team. And so Workspaces are kind of synonymous with Office 365 groups and teams. So you can have a team that has its own workspace where they're collaborating. They can have reports in there. They don't have to leave the Teams environment to go and look at their Power BI reporting. Similar with Dynamics 365, you have embedded Power BI reporting within within Dynamics 365, and it can be embedded in something like SharePoint as well. So you've got this kind of ability to embed different sort of reporting experiences in these different areas, depending on what you're trying to, where the person who consumes the report is the most comfortable consuming it, right? So that you don't have to have people leaving their experience to go into Power BI and log into Power BI and whatever, and then go and get their reporting. They're trying to bring the reporting to you in whatever that experience is most comfortable to you.
Yeah. Cool. Amazing. That was a good tour. I think we have covered most of the feature. Do you see anything else that would require an explanation, or?
Probably the last major sharing thing, and the thing that that people need to know about is this concept of apps. So you have this concept of Power BI apps. So you've got a Power BI workspace, and then you have a Power BI app, not to be confused with the Power App, two totally different things. So a Power BI app is really, that is where we share this out to our end users. So we don't share access to the workspace to give to our end users. If you want to give 100 people access to your report, you wouldn't give those 100 people access to your workspace to do that. What you would do is publish up a Power BI app, and the Power BI app gives them a nicer navigation experience. It gives them like a navigation tree on the left, where you can not only just have the report, but you can have other things. You could embed, say, a Word document that described what the report was about, maybe a video explaining how the report is used, and those sorts of things. So it's a richer experience for your end users. And so really publishing to the final kind of publishing stage is to take your dashboards and your reports and all your things, and then all your collateral associated with that, bundle that up into a Power BI app, and then give that access to your users to that app, and then that app can be accessed, either on the desktop, or it could be accessed in Teams, or it could be accessed via SharePoint, or it could be accessed via mobile. So one of the things we haven't spoken about, and probably the final thing, is you can create a mobile version of any of your reports so that it's easier to read on mobile, and people can scroll through and use the kind of the rich kind of capability of the mobile apps, which allows you to do comments, and you can mark up the reports and do things like that and share them on. So you've got this full kind of business intelligence suite, if you like, that takes you all the way from gathering data and transforming it and then modeling it into this data model, creating these visualizations and reports, adding security to that data model so that people can access it, then publishing it up into this workspace kind of area. The workspace, you can do all sorts of things up there in terms of sharing your reports out, or creating new content on top of it, like dashboards, and then bundling all of that and sharing it out to an app in the end. So your Power BI app is your kind of final destination for your reporting.
Voila, I hope that you liked this video, and if that's the case, please like it and subscribe to the channel if you would like to get notified when I publish additional content, and I'm hoping to see you in the next one.